you don't just accidentally stumble into a Nickelodeon collab. Welcome back to another episode of Deckology, and in this episode I'm going to be answering a question that will probably take up most of this episode because this is one of the most frequently talked about brands, companies, topics in the industry. Your take on hype brands and if they are severely overrated. We're going to get into that in this episode. Okay, so now there are a handful different, depending on hype. Let's start off with the definition of hype before we go any further. Extravagant or intensive publicity or promotion. Promote or publicize a product or idea intensively, often exaggerating its importance or benefits. Fontaine is like undoubtedly, is for sure the brand that comes up when it comes to hype decks. And a lot of times that comes from just the OG days of when Zach would release his first deck with a red one, and then he followed it up with a handful of different colors, and then he started doing collabs. And a lot of the things and a lot of the hate, a lot of the people say about it is it's not like original, it needs to do different stuff. They cost too much money. He makes it hard for them to get, makes it hard for the people to collect. He makes a lot of it just hard in general. And that's kind of the gist of that's to catch you up really quickly if you are unfamiliar with Fontaine. Which, by the way, I found out some of you that don't shuffle cards quite often are listening, and shout out to you guys for checking out this podcast. These are the main Fontaine decks that I use on usually a daily basis. I pick 1 to 3 of these, I would say. If you're listening, I'm going to just ask you to watch and subscribe on YouTube. But otherwise, I will just painstakingly go through each individual one. Fontaine Hollows is one of the decks. This is one of their very first holographic decks, if not their first. And then they've got the and then I've got the Rainbow Edition, and then I've got the Spiral Edition, and then so right away, I love shiny things. That's anything shiny, I'm getting that. This is the Fontaine Window Edition. I love this design. Being able to like kind of see through the card from the back, brilliant. This is the Polka Edition. I like this one. It looks like it's a random order, but it actually has some pattern to it. Actually opened this one up on my birthday when I was out of town for work. And then I've got the Fontaine Dabs Malia. I call these Fontaine Dabs. The flower ones, the flower Fontaines. And then I've got the holographic black ones. And then I've got, so these are just shiny. And then I've got some OG reds. I'm just kidding. These aren't OG reds. These are just the Cranberry Edition. I like these. And then I've got the Babylon Edition, which is basically white and black. And then I have the Nickelodeon one that I use. I've got the complete Nickelodeon series, but I use this one the most, the Wild Thornberries one. I think the pattern on it looks pretty sweet. So to get that out of the way, that is what I use pretty regularly. I use different brands obviously throughout the day, but typically I handle 1 to 3 or 4 or 5 Fontaine decks a day. Let's get into why. So hype has to be established through a presence online, and originally I feel like if hype is around like building up momentum around a release, a lot of times you have to have people that are also going to get behind that release as well. If you don't, you could just have all hype. You could have a really cool video. You could have people using the decks and all that. But if at the end of the day, if you don't have people wanting to support it or they don't like it, then that it will dissolve over time, which is what a lot of Fontaine haters want to see happen. It just hasn't happened. I don't think it will happen. I think it was severely overrated. Sometimes I think some of the decks are overrated. For example, obviously I am I'm pro Fontaine, but also I am pro being real with you. I think the Fantasies and the Fever Dreams launches that they had, I got these at Cardistry Con and one of the Santa specials that they had last year or something. I thought all those designs were pretty ugly. Like, they just weren't my cup of tea. I couldn't get into it. I wanted to, because I love the idea of mystery packages, like what happened with the Nickelodeon release. Like, so I've got a sealed Nickelodeon one still, just for the like, ooh, what could it be? I just think that's pretty clever. I love that. And they did that with Fever Dreams release, and they did that with the Fantasies release. And they did that with the Futures release way back in the day, which is where I think still is probably my favorite batch that they've made. So I'm not a fan of all of their decks, and so I don't feel the need to collect all of them, thankfully. Now let's rewind though back to when I did get my first Fontaine deck, and this is the story, and this is also the deck of the day, the Pink Panthers edition of the Fontaines, signed by Zach here. So the story behind this is I have been reading, I've been hearing, I've been watching all of this stuff about Fontaine, how they're overrated and blah, 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 and overpriced. And there's a lot of decks of cards that still sell for quite a bit of money on the resale market right after their drops. And so I was like, okay, well, if this is the case, I'm going to buy a brick, which is 12 decks for $180. And I'm going to be early to it. And so my sister-in-law was in California. I asked her to go to the Fontaine store during the drop. She got the drop. She got Zach's autograph for me and a couple of other decks. And then that was it. And then $220 later, I had a bunch of Pink Panther Fontaines. And I was like, cool. Until it wasn't. It sat on my shelf for a little while. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And then the sun was coming through my window, because it sets through this window, and it left a sunspot on part of the back of it. I'd show you, but I sold it. I sold all of them to X-Dex for like $160-ish, $180. Like, I lost money on the deal. So the point of that story though is it kind of goes back to one of the first episodes where I was talking about, like, you buy and you find out what you like and what you don't like. And I found out right away, I'm not going to do that again. And then I did. I bought 12 of the Fontaine Hollow Black Edition, and to my credit, I still use them pretty frequently. I've used them to trade for different decks as well. Quite a bit, actually, starting from Cardistry Con, I think is when I started trading some of these. Anyways, I love these, and if you know me, you know I like black. So, and then you mix that with shiny. I'm a fan of these cards. So it is nice having multiples of these. And it's been really nice being able to give these away to people. It's been really nice to be able to trade them for other decks as well. Can't say I regretted that. So that's a win. But is all of that overrated? That is where it is going to be subjective. To one audience, it's not. And to another audience, they're laughing at the fact that I spent money on decks of cards in the first place. So it depends on your perspective and where you're at with your collection and with what you're interested in. Now I've filmed people that are really good at doing things with cards. And if you're listening, I'm probably cutting away to footage right now of people that are doing cool things with Fontaine cards. So with that, their design is a minimal looking design. And when you do certain moves with that design, it kind of accentuates the effect. And I think that is pretty sweet. I like the simplicity of it. To me, it just feels like a Cardistry deck from the very beginning, but it also just kind of feels like a deck that somebody made when they were 14, 15, 16 years old. And because they were teaching magic tricks online for years. And so he wanted to make his own deck. And so he did. And then people were like, hey, I want to buy that. And he was like, okay. You can go back on the Fontaine YouTube channel and you can see kind of the process of the cards becoming the cards. So like from when he launched the Indiegogo Kickstarter campaign, basically, he has all of this documented. And that's where I feel like where a lot of my support for Fontaine and anybody that does this lies, is anybody that can stay that consistent for that long is very impressive to me. It's just like an impressive feat, and it's an impressive ability to constantly be creating consistently. So seeing somebody that has been able to do that, he already had an audience for people to then buy the cards from, which then kind of hypes things up a little bit automatically. So over time, he just re-released different colors. And then eventually I feel like once the Fontaine Futures came out, he was even like hyper aware of the hype and even made a deck that said this is one of 500 made, the 500 deck. And it's probably sells for like $350 now in the resale market. I don't have it. But it's just kind of funny. It's like a statement, I feel like. And I feel like he acknowledges it, but yet people keep buying his cards. For me, I've watched this guy just kind of, when I went down a rabbit hole when I first got into the card world, I saw him like this kid that just started making YouTube videos. And then he started doing magic tricks, and he started selling those magic tricks. And then he started selling, then he made his own deck, and then he started selling that deck. And then he started selling that deck. And then one thing led to another, and he's just been around it for so long at this point that you just kind of build up these natural followers and people that will hype up your brand for you, where like, I don't know if he even has to do it. So, but like the point I guess that I'm trying to make is like, I think the hype is all artificial, and it's made by people that are also, you know what it is? This is it. I think there is a version of hype out there around anti-hype. I think the people that are against the hype, but behind hype brands, cause the hype, and in return there's hype around anti-hype. I think that makes sense. Because like this is all like a tight community already. And so if you have other people that kind of like, yeah, whatever, blah, 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 I can't keep up with their collection. You don't have to, but this goes back to what I said in the other episode. I do feel for the people though that have stuck with them since the beginning, and then all of a sudden you realize you're going to have to buy 12 more decks, and then you realize you're going to have to buy another 12 decks, and you're going to have to somehow get a hold of that one deck that sells for $350, or maybe you have to go ahead and try to find a way to get that $700 deck that just sold on SoCal Playing Cards auction. But that's all by choice. That's what I'll also remind you. It's all by choice if you want to go down that rabbit hole of collecting one of the most successful card brands out there that isn't Bicycle or Tally-Ho or somebody that's been around for forever. So to wrap this up, I think there's hype around anti-hype. So there's definitely hype around people that like to, because I see it. I talk with people about it, and like after that last Hollow release, after they haven't delivered a couple of them, there's people that are like battle crying to not buy from them and just buy from resellers. And to their credit, sure, like don't buy from Fontaine, then maybe he'll see that there's a dip in sales and then he'll modify his behavior. Where I do think a lot of people are underestimating Fontaine, Zach, is this dude is very creative in his endeavors. You don't just accidentally stumble into a Nickelodeon collab. Same thing with Halloween or Pink Panther, which are all, in my opinion, attempts at bringing people that are outside of cardistry into cardistry or cards. Doesn't have to be cards. It could be magic or whatever. Anyway, Evil Dead, another one. So people that don't want to buy from them, don't buy. Just don't buy from But people that also want to see him fail, I think you'll be waiting a long time, because this guy's been making his own way for as long as I think he's been allowed to. I think people that try to bring down anybody by bad mouthing them in private groups and DMs and comment threads, for somebody like Zach, I feel like it's only fueling him when he finds out, because he will then just release a deck that says 1 of 500 of these exist, and all of a sudden people will start fighting tooth and nail for it. Okay, that's the Fontaine episode. Man, let me know what you guys think. I'm curious. I know I don't have the... I know sometimes I've gone back and forth on podcasts with people about Fontaine. I brought up Fontaine on business podcasts that I've been on, just because of his consistency and his like willpower to just like keep doing it. Yeah, I have respect for him, but then again, but I could meet him in person and just be like, oh yeah, I'm going to mass giveaway, or I'm going to be like, I'm glad I bought all these. Could go one way or the other. Yeah. So Zach, if you're listening and you want to jump on the interview sometime, that would be cool. But otherwise, I get it if you don't want to sit and talk about cards more than you already probably have to. Sweet. Thanks for checking this episode out, guys. Make sure you comment below about your thoughts on Fontaine, and if I missed anything, and if there's any points about Fontaine that other people that are outside of the card world, because there are some of those viewers, shout out to you, handful of people, educate them on what I missed, what I left out. But yeah, that's my brain dump on Fontaine.